Welcome to You Are From God, where we open the Bible and learn to see the image of God in ourselves and the people around us. I'm Scott Taylor.
And I'm Tyler Hall. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome back to You Are From God. Certainly thankful that you have tuned in and are joining us for this episode. Scott, today we're going to talk about trusting in God. It's obviously a very prevalent topic when it comes to the life of a Christian. When we understand that I'm from God, you are from God, that means something. It's not just a nice phrase that we can say, but it actually is saying something about the way that we live. And so in the same vein where we can say, I trust God, that's a nice thing to say. It's a good mantra to have, but what does that actually look like practically speaking? Not so much anymore, but we carry around paper sometimes in our pockets that counts for something from our U.S. economy standpoint, and on that green piece of paper, besides dead presidents' faces or dead public figures' faces, we'll have this phrase, "In God we trust." Well, what does that actually mean? Just because I'm using the money doesn't mean I trust in God. That has to mean something is basically what we want to get at. And I think, Scott, when we consider this Old Testament character we're going to talk about today, it's just super prevalent that trust just can't be some idea that we have in our head, but it actually expresses itself in the things that we say and the things that we do.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about Joshua, because he's in a situation now that Moses is dead. He had always followed or always had Moses there. Moses was the leader. Joshua was a good man, obviously. He was around during some very important situations that occurred with Moses. He saw the different things that Moses did. He comes back with a good report, all the different things that we can understand with Joshua. He was a good man. But now Moses is gone, and there's a difference now of you being the leader from that standpoint and him making these decisions and him having to have this relationship with God. And that's an important note, because the book of Joshua begins by God telling this man, who is a very, very good man, over and over again, that you need to be strong and courageous. You need to be strong and courageous. In verse 5 of chapter 1, he says, "No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life, just as I have been with Moses. I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you." God says the same thing to us. Mm-hmm. He's not going to fail us. He's not going to forsake us. He's going to be with us. The question is whether or not we actually believe that. To your point, it's a nice idea. It's great to think that, but to actually see it in practice or in action is so important. So he goes on and tells them, be strong and courageous in verse 6. In verse 7, be strong and courageous, he tells them. In verse 9, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Joshua had a very difficult road ahead of him. There is no question about that. He was going to be the leader of a group of people that were going to go in and take over this land. And it was going to be a very difficult task for him. Even in the best situation where God was the one that was leading him, there were things that, hey, I need you to walk around Jericho. Just walk around and it's going to fall down. You talk about trust, Tyler. Mm-hmm. I believe that this is going to happen because you tell me to. It's going to be on day 7 this is going to occur. I have to do this every single day. I have to trust and the belief that this was going to happen and that Joshua was going to be able to lead the people and they were going to follow was so important. And it's exactly the same for us. There are times where we're in situations where we don't see the end. And there's a lot of times we think we see the end. We just don't have no idea how it's going to end. We would like to think we do. But the reality is we just have to trust in the God who knows. We have to be truly understanding that I don't need to know how this is going to end. I don't need to know how this is going to work out, but I trust in the one who does. And that sometimes can be a difficult thing in action. And that's why I think Joshua and these other people of the scriptures that we can talk about are so important for us to understand their example.
I just imagine the instructions, to your point, that Joshua receives seem like foolishness from a worldly standpoint. Just circle around the city, on the 7th day, you're going to do it this different way. And ultimately, how loud are you going to shout if you're one of the people of Israel? We've been at this 7 days. How loud do you shout? Because you have that trust in God. And, do you even do those things? I just picture Joshua being told all these things in chapter 1, and he's standing at the bank of the Jordan River. And what if he never crossed? He's standing there at the Jordan looking across at this land that God has promised them. Joshua was one of the 2 spies along with Caleb 40 years ago that had gone over and say, it looks bad, but God's promised it to us, and it's good, so let's do it. That's not the same Joshua we would have seen if it was written another way. Thankfully, it's not. But just imagine if Joshua stood on the bank of the Jordan and said, I trust in God. I'm going to let him do the work. But God calls him to put his foot forward, to take some action. And that's what he does with us. Sometimes to the point of Jericho, that first conquest when they cross over, is the idea that, well, is God actually going to be able to do something with this? This seems like it's not going to work, again, from a human standpoint. So you talk about some of the things that we're, as New Testament people of God, Christians, called to do. Keep shining brightly. Don't grow weary of doing good. Wives, be this shining example so that without a word you might win your husbands. And hey, guess what? You can also use your words, these people that are close to us in our lives, that we have an influence on. And sometimes we might step back and say, that would never work. Well, by that logic, it should never work that circling this fortified city should fall. But God's going to use those things, that obedience, that trust in action. And so that's what we really are getting at here, Scott. Joshua demonstrates this awesome power, and it's not taking anything away from God. Again, there is no way that just by other circumstances, people circling around this building. You go on further into the book, there's no right that this fledgling nation coming out of slavery and going across this river to conquer all these nations. In chapter 12 in particular, I'm struck by this just because this is the part of Joshua where the kind of storytelling has taken a back seat now to cataloging and chronicling some of the details. Chapter 12 is just a list of all the kings that they defeated in Canaan. So you've got names that I'm going to mispronounce if I tried to read them. Probably if we read through this is the part where we kind of like zone out a little bit if we're reading our Bibles, and we may, some of us at least, will have to take a little extra effort to focus. But I'll just read the first and the last verse of the chapter. So Joshua 12 and verse 1, now these are the kings of the land whom the people of Israel defeated and took possession of their land beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise, from the valley of Arnon to Mount Hermon, with all the Arabah eastward, and just goes into the list, right? See, I already pronounced one word wrong. I don't know which time I pronounced it wrong, but so you get that verse, and then it goes into this list, right? Okay, what you go. You get down to verse 24, you get the last king of Tirzah, one in all 31 kings. Who cares about 31 kings, especially when I cannot pronounce their names? These are 31 kings that they had no business from a human standpoint defeating. But how did they do it? They went forward, Joshua leading them, but all the people standing up, doing what they needed to do, and it's God who's going to be the one to deliver them and to bring about the victory. That doesn't mean that they can sit back and God's just going to do everything for them, but I have to trust God. I have to be strong and courageous, and that's a huge point of how this book starts off. It requires us to be strong, to stand up and have the strength to act, and to be courageous, not because I think I'm going to do it on my own, but I am courageous because this God who promises all these good things that's not going to fail me is on my side and doing those things.
So I think it's interesting in this list of things we just talked about in verse 9, the king of Jericho, and then the next one is the king of Ai. When you walk around Jericho, which is a tremendously fortified city, and it falls down because that's the power of our God, you come to Ai and you think this is going to be an easy, it will be easy for God, and it would have been, and it certainly was the second time. But what happens is when man does not trust God fully and follow what needs to be done, and it has an impact on every single person that's involved. And Joshua had a choice to make now. Okay, I have to make sure that the people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. You talk about courage. Mm-hmm. I have to be strong. I have to lead them even when they're disobedient unto him. I need to make sure that I'm doing all these things. And I also need to continue to trust that now that I've been through two situations where he destroyed a city by knocking the walls down, and one that he was not with us, and we saw the difference. We've got to make sure that we have full trust in him, that he's going to do exactly what he says he's going to do. And you think about this list, Tyler, to your point, we may not be able to say them, but these are fortified cities. These are cities, to your point that you said earlier, and I don't think it can be overstated, that this group have just come out, relatively just came out of Egypt. They're coming into this new land, and they have no business taking over this area except there's somebody that's involved in this situation. And that's exactly what we need to understand in our life as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just go through this, and again, the second half of this book of Joshua is a lot of this. It's the conquest, the summary of things, and now really the rest of the book from 13 onward is going to be how the land is divvied up. And again, for us, there's a lot of boundaries and geographic talk, and okay. But the amazing thing for these people, it mattered. This is my new home. This is God bringing me out of generations of slavery in Egypt now to give me a place that he says is mine. And that would have been significant for them. Again, for us, the application, understanding that God is faithful to his word. I think Joshua, again, in this book, summarizes it beautifully when you turn back into chapter 21 towards the end of the book in verses 43 through 45. It says, "So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their fathers, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, according to all he had sworn to their fathers. None of their enemies were able to stand against them, for the Lord handed over all their enemies to them. None of the good promises the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. Everything was fulfilled." That is just an awesome verse when you talk about the faithfulness of our God, that he is trustworthy. The question is, do I actually trust him? You see, Scott, we go back and forth to extremes on this, or the danger is we lean too heavily in one direction where, well, I've got to do everything and I'm kind of carrying my own load. And the fact is, God's going to help. God is going to be the one to deliver these things. God gets all the credit in verses 43 to 45. It was the Lord who did these things. But when we read in Joshua 12 just a minute ago, it was the people of Israel are conquering these things. So appreciating that I do have a role to do, not taking that away from God, but God's not just going to hand me over things. I've got things that I need to do that show I'm trusting him. My trust needs to be in action. And so to the point that we made before, we're not conquering physical cities, so to speak, but we talk about conquering hearts, talk about influencing people. When we consider the difference that we can make in our own lives, how we want to improve or excel still more, just getting better, even just the opportunities we have to tell other people about Jesus. You think about the trust in God that I've got my idea of how I should or would do this. Do it God's way. Do it God's way. And we might question and say, is that really going to work? Yes. Yes, it will. It might not be in the exact method that you think, and it might not be in the timetable that you think, but the encouragement we have from Joshua 21 and verse 45, none of the good promises the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. Everything was fulfilled. We just do our part and trust in God. He's going to make the difference. That doesn't account, again, for other people's free will if we're trying to have the connection or an influence on somebody else's life. And quite frankly, it doesn't mean that we have promises that aren't recorded for us, that if we do these exact things or follow this 10-step program, that boom, this is going to happen. But we have bigger and greater promises, the idea of being his child and the fact that it convicts other people and all these different things that we can go to the scriptures and see that there's this inheritance that we have to look forward to, not of this physical land that comes and goes through the history of Israel even, but an abiding inheritance in heaven, this being able to say, I have a home waiting for me with God in his presence forever. That's ultimately what's motivating our trust, his goodness, his faithfulness, and that gives me reason to be strong and courageous.
You know, he ends the book to the point you were just making, that you can't make other people necessarily do things like that, where Joshua says, look, now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth. Put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it's disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you're living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The people are going to answer correctly. But when you get into Joshua or to Judges, you see that another generation has come up, and there's choices that are being made. And so it's important for us to understand that you can trust in him. You do what you need to do. As much as I would love to make other people do that, you're just to be the influence. Let them see his good work. Let them be able to go throughout life. And when they get to Rahab, as an example earlier on, she said that the people were scared because they had heard of this God. Mm-hmm. You know, the example, that's what we want people to see. We want to have them see him and to understand that we are his children and how blessed we are to be able to say we are from God.
Thanks for listening. Show your support by leaving a review on your podcast app, and share this episode with someone you want to encourage. If you have questions or would like to get in touch with us, go to youarefromgod.com. That's youarefromgod.com.